So now that we have a better understanding of how to read and write things into a CSV file, as well as writing things using the dictionary version of a CSV file, we are now going to create something to do things with that data. That is, we are going to add stuff to it, and we're going to do it by using a standard Python function versus all the stuff that we're doing here, right? So like if I wanted to write a row right now or append a row, I have to actually write out writer.writeRow. That's not very programmatic, right? That's very, very manual. So in this one, we're going to go ahead and implement this in a way that we'll actually use in our program later. So I'm going to go ahead and make a new file here, and I'm going to call this hungrydata.py. hungrydata.py. So this is our data. This is where we're going to be working with our data that we are going to be storing in data.csv. So initially with data.csv, I'm actually going to delete all of the data that's currently in there, and we are going to copy everything from our w_csv for our own reference. I do this all the time. I copy other code that I've written somewhere just for some reference for while I'm writing things that I need. In fact, there's even some reference here off the screen that you guys can't even see, just to help me with actually writing code, but also making sure that we're going nice and fluid on this. So the first thing that I want to do is I want to make a method that is going to append to my data. So basically I want to make sure to do this, so I'm going to define it. So I'll say append data, and it's going to take some data. We're going to take some arguments in here, and right now I'm just going to say pass. So this function is going to do a few things. First of all, it's probably going to assume that the file's created. So it has to check to make sure that that file is even a file. If it's not a file, then we're going to have to create that file. But right off the bat, I'm not going to necessarily check whether or not it's created. I already have it created, so I'm going to assume that it's created at this time. So append data, we want to get the file name, or more specifically, the file path. And I'll explain this in just a second, but we'll do file path. I'm going to do the name of somebody and then email. So this is all I'm actually going to put in. So that means that I want to have 3 fields for my field sets. So I'll say field names equals to, and we'll do ID, name, and email. Again, field names, that's coming from here, writer, everything, right? So this is going to be our header. So I can go ahead and copy a lot of this stuff right here and print it down here. But what I do see is ID is being a field name, but it's not actually being passed, right? So now I want to do is figure out the length of the actual entire file, or the length of the rows. So how many rows are there? So the length of the number, or rather, instead of the length, you'd say the number of rows. So let's actually figure out what the number of rows are by creating a function for it. So I'm going to define get length, and we're going to take in that file path again, and we're going to return some length. So I'm going to return 1 for now. Okay, so get length is going to take in that file path, and it's going to return 1. So we'll just say the next ID equals to get length of the file path. So this is going to be our ID value. This will make a lot more sense once we do it, but just think about this logically is when we're appending data, the next item in the row, so the very first item is going to have, the very first row should have our field names, right? But the very first item added should have an ID of 1. The second item added should have an ID of 2, and then so on. Like you would just keep going down that line, and that's where this get length function is really going to come in. So the very first one we do is, of course, going to have an ID of 1. But we're not going to change this get length function quite yet. So now that we've got this append data, I do actually want to write this data. So again, it's append data. Remember how we did append before in the mode of append. So inside of our working with files, we have a mode here that says append to existing file or creates new file. So that's what we're going to do now, and we will say with open, and this is going to be file path, comma, A for append as CSV file. And now we can just tab all of this stuff in. So I'm going to get rid of this pass call. Now that we've got this, we can add that writer and then dot right row parentheses. I'm going to give us some space here. And in this right row function, I'm going to use some curly brackets. We are not going to put, or we are going to put ID, and we're going to say next ID. We'll say name is equal to name, as in the variable that's being passed, or the parameter that's being passed, and then email, and being the exact same thing. So this is our function for appending data. So this should absolutely 100% work at this time, because our file path will go to data.csv, our name will be whatever we want. So let's go ahead and run this. I'm going to get rid of all of our examples now because we no longer need them. So this is now our file, right? It has a function called append data. So let's actually call that function with append data. We'll do file path of data.csv. And then the name will be Justin, email hello@teamcfe.com. Right, so that's our team's email address, that's my name, and we've got our data. So this should actually add it into our data.csv file. So now what we can do is actually run this Python file from the terminal outside of the shell. So let's exit out of Python and list everything out where you are. So ls or dir if you're on Windows. And we notice that our new file here of hungry data is now there. So I can actually do Python 3 or just Python and hungry_data.py, press enter. And if we come back in here, I now see that, hey, check it out. I actually have this data coming through. That's great. So that means that it's actually working. If I ran it again, the data comes through again. But it actually added that row for us. So we might need to change some things as far as that's concerned, but for now, it is there and it's working. So the reason that we have that is because this is append. If I got rid of this right row, this is actually how we would do it. So let's go ahead and get rid of that. This right row header or right header. And I'm going to go into my data and I'm going to go ahead and get rid of this. Save that. And we'll try that one more time. I saved everything, ran Python 3 again, and there we go. So this time, maybe I didn't save this correctly. Let's try that again one more time. Saved and saved. And there we go. So now it's actually writing that extra row. It's appending it just as we expected, and it's not adding the header in there. Notice that when we did have the header in there, it added it to the end. It actually, so if we brought that header back in, if we bring this back in, it's going to go on line 6. So let's do it. Saved everything, and we see that it's on line 6. So appending goes to the end of the file and adds it there, and that's a really, really clear example of that. So now that we've got that, let's go ahead and edit our data a little bit back to what it should be. Now we need to update this getLength method. So we actually want to get the length of whatever this file path is. I still will talk about this file path in just a second, but let's go ahead and get this length. It's fairly simple. We're just going to do with open data.csv as CSV file. And now we'll say CSV file or read file. So we'll reader equals to csv.reader, and that's the CSV file. And then we'll say reader list equals to the list of the reader. So this will ensure that it is a list item. So everything in there becomes a big list, basically. We could print out that if we wanted to, so print out reader list. But really, we just want to return the length of the reader list. So that length is going to give us how many rows are in there. So there's going to be, in this case, there will be 6 rows, right? So realistically, each one of these, this should be 1, this should be 2, this should be 3, this should be 4, and 5. So the next one should actually be 6. So if I save it with that empty row gone, notice I did have that row there, but if I save that and do it just like that, that should actually return 6 to us. Okay, so let's go ahead and run this again. Save it, and we run. And now we get everything in a list. Looks good. If we come back in here, we actually didn't get a new row here. So let's try that again with creating that new row. I think it might have been because I deleted that one. And if I delete it, there we go. So now it's actually showing it as it should. It has all the spacing as necessary, and it's also auto incrementing our integers, right? So if I keep adding that, it's going to keep going. Really, really cool. Very easy, not that advanced. So what is going on with this data.csv file and the path, more specifically, to data.csv file? Now, if we look into our directory, we see that we have our hungry_data.py and our data.csv file. It's in the same directory. If it was in a different directory, we would have to change our file path here. And we've talked about OS path. We did this with template stuff, and that was a few days ago. But we did it with template stuff on where this file path is actually going to be. But in this case, it's in data.csv. In the future, we might want to move where that file path is. But for now, I'm just going to be doing it inside of that same directory. Okay, so now we have a way to append data, but we don't have a way to really edit this data. Right, so this is now like a much bigger concept that we want to talk about, is how do we actually edit this data? And that's something we'll be doing in the next one. But so far what we have right here is we can get the length to set the ID of the item. And please note that this defaults to R, so it defaults to reading it, and that's it. I'm going to go ahead and get rid of this print statement. So we get that length of it to give us that auto-generated ID. This is one way to do it. This is not the only way, but it does give us that. And then finally, we actually append that new data to it. So this is fairly straightforward. So this right here, this method, you could import on another Python module and actually run and use it, which eventually we will do. But right now, this actually works perfect for us because it's now allowing us to work with this data on a much easier way than just writing out each row manually. Okay, so in the next one, what we're going to do is edit this stuff, which brings a whole nother set of issues that we need to think about. So if you have any questions on this one, let us know. Otherwise, we'll see you tomorrow.